If you love stories of intrigue and espionage, of romance and drama, of heists, duels, and feats of daring do, you should consider world building a palace. Because palaces are world building set pieces rich with drama and storytelling potential. They're incredible locations for showcasing the cultures and values in your setting, for bringing important and interesting characters together, and for creating a microcosm of your world in one multifaceted yet easy to manage story location. I'm Janet from World Anvil. I'm a professional author and game writer and a world building consultant. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to world build a palace for maximum storytelling potential, what you should include, and some ideas of plots you can weave in there too. But let's start with a critical question. What is a palace? Or really, what's the difference between a castle and a palace? Castles are usually military buildings. They're built in strategic places and they have fortified walls. And they're often manned by a garrison of able guards or soldiers. Palaces, on the other hand, are luxurious residences. Often they're designed to impress other people, showcasing the wealth and power of the realm. For many leaders, they're also refuges, a place to get away from the stress of war and the pressures of ruling and leadership, or, depending on the sewer situation, maybe just the smell of the city. And palaces aren't just for royals. Bishops, politicians, and other wealthy people in your world might have them too. Because palaces don't need all that defensive infrastructure, they're an amazing opportunity for world builders to go wild. You can do some seriously crazy fun things here, like having an entire room made to look like an underwater grotto. And yes, this is a real place. Palaces also make fantastic places for the settings of stories. Your entire story, or most of it, might take place in a palace, like the Goblin Emperor, or a character might visit a palace as part of a story. Either way, they make an amazing set piece for your world building. When you're world building your palace, there are certain things you'll need to add. To start with, you probably have a suite of rooms for the palace's owner, whether that's a prime minister, a king, or a cardinal, and maybe for their family too. You'll also need rooms for the guests to stay in, and palaces generally have a lot of guests, including diplomats, courtiers, and celebrities of the age. And of course, that means you'll need kitchens and dining areas too. You'll also need accommodation for their staff, their vehicles, their horses, if they have them, and anything else they need for the basics of getting dressed, going places, sleeping, and eating. Next, let's talk entertainment. Depending on what's important for your culture, you might need to include at least one theatre or concert hall, a ballroom, a library, a game room or two, maybe some spaces for outdoor sports and activities. And this is where things can get really interesting. Do you have a cool game or sport in your world? A particular kind of entertainment or theatre? Consider how you can layer these into the space to create a really unique palace for your setting. If your culture is religious, you might need a chapel or other religious buildings to serve those needs. Royal palaces were usually the location of the royal court, where the courtiers would hang out. So, as you world build, you'll need to make provision not just for your ruler's family, but for the whole court. If your culture has ceremonies that require unusual spaces or equipment, you'll need that too. For example, how do they celebrate saints' days, or lunar phases, or summer solstice? Many historical palaces, especially those deigned as summer palaces, had extensive gardens. At Frederick the Great's palace, Sans Souci, it literally means without worries, by the way, I cannot stop calling it the Hakuna Matata Palace. He grew vines, vegetables, and fruits. In the winter, when the weather prevented them from enjoying the countryside, many monarchs historically went to their winter palaces in the city. This gives a really interesting seasonal aspect to society for those who can afford it. Now we've talked about the different spaces you might create for your palace, let's consider the aesthetic. So to start with, who currently owns your palace and what's their personality and taste? What do they value? Your big bad evil guy probably won't live in a palace of light and lace. Although he might. And the values of different cultures, as well as gender and taste, will play a huge role in how the palace looks and feels. Is your palace's owner strict and religious, or hedonistic and louche? Are they more interested in intellectual pursuits, or sports, or the arts? That won't just define the spaces that appear in the palace, it'll also define the decorations. For example, Frederick the Great was a keen strategist, but also a lover of music and nature. So it's no surprise that decorations in his palace are warlike and nature-inspired and musical. It's an unusual combination, but it shows exactly what he valued. Your players and readers will learn loads before they ever meet the owner just by looking at the walls. Also, consider varying public and private spaces. In the ballroom, your Your ruler is impressing others, but in his private library, he only needs to please himself. This gives varied vibes and intent across different rooms, creating more interesting spaces for your characters to explore. And think about the history of the palace. Are there things there from previous rulers or previous fashions? Or is the palace built new and bespoke for the current owner? Both choices can add richness to the aesthetics and help you make things specific and memorable. And of course, what's going on? What's happening in the palace? Because palaces are a microcosm of the world. Whatever issues are unfolding in the country, the kingdom, or the empire will make their way into the palace. Current affairs will affect conversation, opinion, fashion, intentions, and create an opportunity for drama. I encourage you to set up fascinating factions, perplexing politics, and intriguing philosophies, and allow them to create interesting tensions among your characters. Maybe certain things can't be bought or replaced because there's a war going on beyond the garden walls. Perhaps religious persecution in the country has led everyone to be more devout, or even more hedonistic, at least behind closed doors. Maybe they're all hiding out from a plague, like in the Decameron. New technologies might be the talk of the ballroom, with the latest clockwork or magical baubles being brought out to amuse guests. Working your current affairs into your palace environment allows you to showcase what's going on in your world with interesting exposition. But it also makes your palace environment feel alive and connected to the real world, despite the fact that the palace naturally sets itself apart from the rest of society. It creates a really interesting dichotomy that you can explore in your stories. And speaking of stories, let's talk story types. Palaces are great locations to tackle a bunch of different kinds of stories. Upstairs, downstairs stories of class divide and social mobility can play out beautifully in a palace. Sure, the rich guy lives in a big house, but what about those who serve him, or those who live beyond its borders? How do those two worlds come together, and how do you resolve that? Palaces are also a good place to explore colonial narratives. European palaces often had Orientalist motifs, exotic art collected on the Grand Tour, and were even funded by overseas colonies. How does your culture see this? And what would somebody from those colonies think if they set foot in this palace? And how can we make that happen for story reasons? I mentioned romance and intrigue earlier because wherever you get an interesting cross-section of strangers thrown together, interesting things can happen. By the way, watch our Roll 34 and world building video. Just saying. And palaces, with their extensive gardens, hidden dark corners, outhouses, and private rooms, can play host to all sorts of interpersonal shenanigans, whether stabby or spicy. And speaking of stabby, how about a spot of murder? Because there are a limited number of people with means, motive, and opportunity confined in a remote palace, palaces make a great location for a murder mystery plot. And finally, let's talk about heists. Palaces are usually filled with extraordinary items, and a palace heist with a group of people coming together to infiltrate the palace and pull off a complex plan would be fabulous. There are so many unique people and places to incorporate in the plot. Do you already have a palace in your world? Or are you going to go and create one right now? Let me know in the comments. And if you're into creating castles instead, check out our video on how to world build a castle. Just don't get all defensive on me. I'm sorry for the pun. That was really bad. All right, grab your hammer and go world build.